Hello, and welcome to Learning the Social Sciences, America's War in Vietnam, 1969 lecture. So, when we left off at the end of 1968, we had the presidential election, and Nixon was voted in as president. Now, as you know, in the United States, you're voted in the fall and you become president in the winter. So, Nixon was inaugurated on January 20th, 1969, as the 37th president of the United States. And he is the person that was running on a platform to get the United States out of Vietnam. So, after a period of confrontation in Vietnam, we are entering an era of negotiation, is a statement from Nixon's address. And he goes and appoints as his vice president Spiro T. Agnew. So, Nixon right away proposes this new policy of de escalation of the Vietnam War by pursuing this policy called Vietnamization, in which American military forces would withdraw and South Vietnamese forces would take over responsibility for their own national defense. And this is supposed to be a process, and over periods of time, the United States would leave them some military arms and some money to be able to control themselves and be in charge of their own program. Now, the other part, which we talked about, was the negotiations. And so the Nixon administration immediately goes and tries to figure out how to do the peace talks. And so we have the Paris peace talks, negotiations that have a peace conference. It started in 1968, and Nixon had the path to the talks slowed down to help him with the election. Now, this is a huge thing, because if this would have came out even before Watergate, this is a huge thing. Of course, Nixon is running about getting out of the war. Think if LBJ would have started to have successful negotiations with the peace conference. Think how that could have changed and shaped the election for 1968. If the Democratic Party could also say that they are also getting the United States out of the war, it could have changed a lot. And now a lot of people look at this as another one of dirty tricks from Nixon. Now, January 25th, 1969, the Paris peace talks open with the United States, South Vietnam, North Vietnam, and the Viet Cong all in attendance. And they're supposed to be sitting at a round table with each other, and that doesn't happen because at a round table they're all kind of next to each other, and you have people that don't want to sit down at the table because they don't want to be sitting next to people they don't want to be sitting next to. And so this is a very big junior high school lunch problem here that we are having. And this is going to be slowing down the peace process. Day one, because of table, it is slowing down the process. Now, January 27th, 1969, on the evening of that night, and early morning of the 23rd, the Viet Cong soldiers attacked 110 targets throughout South Vietnam, including Saigon again. Somebody thought that it was another Tet offensive, just, now a year later, 1969. But this time they focused more on military targets across South Vietnam. Well, in 1969, they focused on governmental buildings and officials in urban areas, and killing of civilians that worked for the government. However, also unlike Tet, in 1968, the United States were prepared for a larger assault based off of the movements of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So the U.S. kind of has been monitoring the situation. We are, of course, trying to attack the trail as much as we can, and it's a very difficult task. So what you have is during the daytime, you have our jets flying over, helicopters flying over, trying to figure out where there is movement. And so if you're somebody who is a driver on the trail, what you are doing is you are driving at night with no lights. You memorize your part of the trail and you drive that back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth because you have no lights. And this is a dirt road trail that's not really a road. It's kind of what you're just driving in the jungle that has been cleared for you. And if you make a wrong move with your wheel, you might get stuck and stop the entire road. And then daylight breaks, and the U.S. jet fighters see you, find you, and take you out. So The US is hoping for things like that. In a later episode of Ken Burns' The Vietnam War, you have a fighter pilot who's talking about how he is shooting. And one of his missiles kind of fires in the wrong area and just hits what he thinks is just jungle. But then he starts seeing explosion after explosion after explosion after explosion after explosion and after explosion. And so what he has obviously found is he has found the hiding place of all of the transport vehicles where they are hiding in dense foliage during the daylight hours, and he was able to take them. And so the United States is a little bit better at stopping or at least slowing down transit on various sectors of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Now, with this offensive, 1,140 Americans were killed, and over 1,500 South Vietnamese troops were killed on this February 22nd to the 23rd Tet kind of part two offensive. Now, what happens here in 1969 is what we talked about in the last episode with My Lai is now it's finally exposed. It is out there. The press has discovered it. So, March 1969, Vietnam veteran Ronald Rittenauer sent letters to the president, congressmen, and the Pentagon and the press so the U.S. Army would launch an investigation into what happened at My Lai. On September 5th, 1969, the U.S. Army brought murder charges against Lieutenant William Calley concerning the massacre of the Vietnamese people, the civilians at My Lai in March of 1968. And now this is something that is again splitting the nation. You have people that are looking at William Calley, the person who murdered and called for the murder of men, women, children, and babies as just a horrible, murderous man. Somebody who is unfit for society. And then you have other people that are just kind of trying to excuse him as this is what happens in war and different things, and excuse after excuse after excuse. But you see this, another area at which the nation is torn. But another effect of My Lai being exposed is the how the U.S. servicemen are looking when they are coming back from war. Are you somebody who went and served honorably for your nation, or are you a William Calley? What secret are you hiding that we're not going to find out for another year for what you did over there? And so unfortunately for a lot of veterans, this is the time now when they're coming back and they're getting spit on when they are arriving back in the United States. These are some people that have, yeah, witnessed and done a lot. And now they're coming back to their nation expecting to get, a handshake, a thank you for your service. And somebody spits at them. So this is the ever-changing and evolving United States as we are going through this conflict. So this is the primary document. This is the letter that Mr. Ron Ridenour sent to the congressman, to the press, to the Pentagon. And so, as it reads, gentlemen, it was late in April 1968 that I first heard of Pinkville and what allegedly happened there. I received that first report with some skepticism, but in the following months I was to hear similar stories from such a wide variety of people that it became impossible for me to disbelieve that something rather dark and bloody did indeed occur sometime in March 1968 in a village called Pinkville in the Republic of Vietnam. The circumstances that led to my having access to the reports I'm about to relate need explanation. I was inducted in March 1967 into the U.S. Army. After receiving various trainings, I was assigned to the 70th Infantry Detachment, 11th Light Infantry Brigade at Schoenfeld Barracks, Hawaii in early October 1967. That unit, the 70th Infantry Detachment, was disbanded a week before the 11th Brigade shipped out for Vietnam on the 5th of December 1967. All of the men from whom I later heard reports of the Pinkville incident were reassigned to C Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry, 11th Light Infantry Brigade. I was reassigned to the aviation section of headquarters Company 11th LIB. After we had been in Vietnam for 3 to 4 months, many of the men from the 70th Infantry began to transfer into the same unit, E Company 51st Infantry. In late April 1968, I was awaiting orders for a transfer from HHC 11th Brigade to Company E 51st Infantry when I happened to run into Butch Groover, whom I had known in Hawaii. Groover told me he had been assigned to C Company 1st of the 20th until April 1st when he transferred to the unit that I was headed for. During the course of our conversation, he told me the first of many reports I was to hear of Pinkville. Charlie Company 120 had been assigned to Task Force Baker in late February 1968 to help conduct search and destroy operations on the Battalion Peninsula, Baker's area of operation. The task force was operating out of LF Dottie, located 5 or 6 miles north of Quang Ngai City on Vietnamese National Highway 1. Groover said that Charlie Company had sustained casualties, primarily from mines and booby traps, almost every day from the first day they arrived on the peninsula. One village area was particularly troublesome and seemed to be infested with booby traps and enemy soldiers. It was located about 6 miles northeast of Quang Nai City at approximate coordinates BS 723795. It was a notorious area, and the men of Task Force Baker had a special name for it. They called it Pinkville. One morning in the latter part of March, Task Force Baker moved out from its fire base, headed for Pinkville. Its mission: destroy the trouble spot and all of its inhabitants. When Butch told me this, I didn't quite believe that what he was telling me was true, but he assured me that it was and went on to describe what happened. The other two companies that made up the task force cordoned off the village so that Charlie Company would move through to destroy the structures and kill the inhabitants. Any villagers who ran from Charlie Company were stopped by the encircling companies. I asked Butch several times if all the people were killed. He said that he thought they were men, women, and children. He recalled seeing a small boy about 3 or 4 years old, standing by the trail with a gunshot. That is just the first page of the testimony that he wrote and sent off. Now, obviously, it is very specific and tries to give as much information as possible. And it is a letter that is going to be now reshaping the home front of the Vietnam War. Jumping in, we have Operation Menu. Operation Menu was the code name for the bombing campaign done in Cambodia from March 18, 1969 to March 26, 1970. Now, Nixon had run on a campaign to de-escalate the war. That's the whole point of Vietnamization. However, he is moving the war now into Cambodia. The bombing was targeting PAVN and Viet Cong troops, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong troops, and supply lines on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Because to Nixon, you have to stop the trail, and the trail is mainly operating in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. And so for him, you have to also target the Vietnamese that are fighting for the North or for the Viet Cong in Cambodia and Laos. So there was some bombing in Cambodia and Laos under Johnson, but this was allowed for B-52s to be used. And now Nixon is going to be revving it up and doing bombings in the other areas. This is also something, when it is revealed to the American public, it is going to, again, bring down the trust level of government in on the home front, and is also going to make people, again, opposed to this now escalating war or a war that is now jumping into more countries instead of de-escalating. So that is what we're covering in part 1 of 1969. If you have any questions, please comment below. Thank you.